Hello. Um, so today we're going to introduce Solvent-Workflow, which is our new workflow automation capability added to the workflow, to the Solvent Intelligent Workspace environment. Previously, we introduced the idea of code gen based tooling, which is the idea that you can have the AI write code that targets tools that are referenced within the code, and then at runtime you can provide an instance of those tools via dependency injection. So this is an implementation of that idea within the Solvent workspace environment. So we'll create a workflow project folder to start with. The wrong option there. Create a folder first. Let's call it workflow tests. Yeah, hope this goes well. Select that, make sure it's the right folder selected. Now we can create a workflow project within that folder. It asks for requirements and any tools that you're going to use to build your workflow. So within Solvent-Workflow, there is no dragging and dropping to build workflow automations. AI writes the code that does workflow automation. You provide it access to tools, and then it uses those tools to write the code. The tools themselves expose APIs. You can think of the tools as SDKs that expose an API, and the AI can look at the API and look at the instructions that you provide and figure out which API methods are suitable. It's a bit of a work in progress. I think we do need to improve the instructions tied to some of these tools. Like here's a description. We'll probably need to make certain things explicit. Just from my own testing, I know that, for instance, sometimes it will ignore the tool APIs exposed in the tool and then just go do some other stuff, right? We'll see if it does that, and we'll try to fix it. So here we're using Groovy because we're going to have it write a back-end based workflow. It could also be front-end, which means it runs within the browser, but we'll skip that for now. And I'll get the instructions. Alright, so here we have the instruction that says create a workflow that accepts a file path and splits the file in half. Save each file as each half in a separate file, and then provide the second half to a general assistant to summarize. This BotWorks tool gives us access to automation programs, aka agents, and so that's how it's going to be able to pass out that second half to the assistant for analysis. I've run this demo a few times, as I mentioned. I think the tooling descriptions need to be improved so that the AI does the right thing. I've noticed sometimes it will not use the asset manager as it should, and it also fails in a couple other things. So I'm going to try to preempt that by telling it to use the asset manager. We shouldn't really have to do this because the whole point is to abstract this type of thing away from the user so that the user only needs to provide the instructions that they need without getting into the nitty-gritty details of how it should be done. But just for this demo, I'll do this with the asset manager file. opens up an automation program, the software coding assistant, which is the one that's going to write the workflow code. The coding assistant is an out-of-the-box automation program that comes with Solvent-Workflow, so that's available for doing this coding. Okay, so it's written the code. Let's see if it did what I asked it to do. Alright, so it did use the asset manager. And the second thing that I hope it did was to identify the correct assistant, which it did. That's the ID of the assistant, which it automatically determined based on me saying that it should use the general assistant, and we'll see the log to show that the process in action where it's using the code gen tools to write the workflow code, and it's using the model tools, in other words function calling tools, as part of that to assist, right? So it needs that function calling tool to determine the right assistant ID, so we don't have to spell it out in an instruction, which is kind of the point. If you're going to create a workflow automation program, you want the user to not be bogged down with technical details. All right, so a few things that are still fishy. I think I'm using an old instance here, which is missing some updates, which is preventing the proper dismissal of that status screen. It's complete here, so I'll close this out. So we have a process flow, which is also AI generated. If you take a look at this process flow, it basically just outline the steps that this workflow executes. Here's a reference to the invocation of the general assistant. We can even click on a button here, and depending on the code, it can open up the code and select the line that's relevant to that node, which if you need to go into the code is obviously helpful. Our assumption is that once we improve the prompting, and if the tools that are created have sufficient instructions, you would not need to switch to code, but there may be a need for that sometimes. Let's see if any one of these actually works with the code selection. Alright, so this one should work. When I click that, it opens this up and highlights the line that's relevant to that node, which is nice from a UX standpoint. Alright, so we have our code in there. Now let's review what the AI actually did. We provided it with a bunch of instructions that it needs to write a workflow. We gave it all the information needed for using the tool. Right? We identified there's a tool metadata. Basically, it's a metadata that describes the API of the tool and the description of what the tool does. It did that for both the asset manager and the assistant invoker, which is the BotWorks module tool. And then, as it was writing the code here, it determined that we asked for a general assistant, but it needs the actual ID for the assistant, which we did not provide. But we did provide a tool that can list available assistants in the system, so it used that to determine that there is an assistant available, and it's called general assistant, which is in here, and the ID is 6. That's how it's able to determine that 6 is the value that should be passed to this invoke automation assistant function, right? So that's very neat. It's a way to really drive automation by eliminating what I would consider drudgery. Um, so let's see. We have this. Sometimes it'll do certain things, make certain assumptions that are not what you want. Again, I think all of this can be fixed via the proper tooling to account for some of those concerns. So I'm looking at this here. Take the file path and replace. All right, I think this should be fine because it's using the original file path that we're going to provide to determine the two splits that it's supposed to do. Sometimes it will just kind of hallucinate the file name and leave out like the // which can create problems. All right, so I think we're good here. I have a good feeling about what it did here. So let's close this out. I'm gonna close out this code in view. I'm gonna clean out the session because we're gonna reuse it. Basically, when we run this workflow, it will reuse this session. All of this stuff is configurable, so you have complete control over how you set this type of thing up eventually. Let's open up a configuration for workflows. I've run this test before, so I think there's some stuff in there that I want to get rid of. This is the registry. We're going to need to register the workflow before we can use it. There's an old one I think I left in here. Right, so let's remove this just to clean things up. Alright, so with that, we can try to run it. It's going to prompt us to register the workflow because you have to register it before you can run it. I'll say yes. And it'll provide a registration screen for the workflow. We'll select the category where we want to put it. You can define as many categories as you want. Call this file splitter. And here's a schema for the workflow that describes the parameters that the workflow accepts. This is all AI generated. Of course, we provide it with instructions for how to do this, and it automatically does it for us. So let's register the workflow. Now if we go back to try to run it, it should allow us. Okay, so it gives us a screen that identifies the arguments that the workflow expects. So I'm gonna tell it to take the requirement document. I'll take the path to that as the input. So it's going to split that file in two halves and then send the second half to the agent to analyze. When it's finished, I'll refresh this. It should have within it the two split files. Okay, so hopefully that went through correctly. The method that implements the workflow I don't think returns a result, which is why we have this as empty. So here are the two files we created, and it's split requirement first half and requirements second half. Now, if we go back to our workflow, to our automation program. Let's open up the session. We should see the second half that was provided here. Alright, so here's a summary that it generated. Right, so the required task, split the file, blah blah blah. Now, if this was set up to return results, we'll be able to capture this summary here and return it. It's not set up to do that. We didn't tell it to return results. I could update it to do that, and we'll have this information. It will probably return a fairly complex object. There is a path to get to this information, which again, we'll probably eventually have to improve documentation, for instance, for the information that's returned by this, so that the workflow coded agent would know how to extract like a summary, or how to, how to do other things with the result that it gets from the assistant. But we got our workflow automation created, we ran it, and we got interaction between the workflow and automation agents, aka, or we call them automation programs, aka agents, working together. And here you have your process flow, which is AI generated. No drag and drop of anything, just get AI to write code that implements workflow. I think it's the correct way. We have pre-AI workflow automation, which was the whole drag and drop thing. Post-AI workflow automation, you get AI to write your workflow for you. Users simply have to provide the instructions. Assuming you have your tools, you can, the AI will write the code for you. In this environment, you can create the tools. We don't yet have a comprehensive tool set, but that's in the works. So that we'll have some out-of-the-box tools, for popular services that people use that way. You don't have to build all of your tools, but you can build whatever tools you want integrated into the environment, which is pretty neat. In other videos, we'll probably delve more into tool building. Tool building is really just another, coding project that you start in here, create a folder, and you're ready to go. I think if right, so there's a menu here for building tools. I click on that. Right, so provide some basic information, like the name of the tool name. Right, so if you saw the code, it had asset manager as a name. Now, when we're creating the asset manager tool, that's what we put in here. It's basically literally just an object name. In Groovy, it will be a Java object. In JavaScript, it will just be a JavaScript object in the language that you choose. Yeah, in the future, we might consider supporting other languages. The environment is polyglot, but considering that this is automated code writing for workflow, we think limiting it to the two languages are more than sufficient for what people are going to need it for. But this is very neat. It's, to us, this is how you get AI to do workflow automation. You can, of course, ask the models to do it directly, but this is a much more reliable way where you have our workflow automation, you build it, it works. You can run it 1,000,000 times without any variation on what the result is going to be, which is somewhat different from if you just try to use the models with tools to do that directly for you. There's always that bit of guesswork involved. We saw the workflow interacting with the automation program agent. Agents can also invoke workflows directly. I'm not going to get into that here so that this video doesn't go on too long, but agents can call workflows as well, right? So that's a fairly powerful capability because you get, a complete loop of automation where you have some of the automation would be fairly deterministic. So you could imagine creating automations for things that you want, for sure how it needs to be done, you get the workflow automation created, and you inject the agents in the process where it makes sense for the agent to be injected. In this example that we demoed, we had the agent analyze the second half of a file split. That's kind of the strength of AI models, language models, remember? So understanding free-form information is their core strength. So if you're using them for automation, you probably should be thinking about that fact as opposed to just viewing it as as a universal workflow automation engine. It's better when you can lean in on the thing that they're good at, and then you can just rely on deterministic automation for other stuff. It's a good complementary setup that I think is going to deliver a great deal of value for us. Anyway, thank you very much.